Hey, crime connoisseurs. If you're like me, you love diving into a good book. I especially love finding a book about cases we cover. But sometimes it's hard to find the time to sit and read. We live in an on-the-go society. Thankfully, Audible makes it easy to instantly access the books we love without sacrificing our time. With over 180,000 audiobooks and more, you will undoubtedly find one that will grip you and leave you not wanting to pull away while still being able to do other things. You can get a free 30-day trial membership by going to audibletrial.com/ccpod to start listening to your favorite books. That's audibletrial.com/ccpod for your free 30-day trial membership. Hey, my fellow crime connoisseurs. I'm your host, Grace D. And if you guys still need to listen to the last episode, stop now and go give it a listen. This week's case picks up where we left off with Taunja Bennett's murder. As a recap, Taunja Bennett was murdered on January 21st, 1990. Laverne Pavlinac and John Sosnovske were arrested for her murder after Laverne made several confessions to detectives. After serving 3 years into their life sentences, letters began to emerge to the police and media from an unknown person claiming responsibility for Taunja's murder, and they didn't stop there. On August 30th, 1992, the decomposed skeletal remains of an unidentified woman were found in Blythe, California. California Jane Doe was in an open desert area in Blythe, 100 feet west of Highway 95 and 1 mile north of 2nd Avenue. She was found raped and murdered. It's unknown where her murder occurred, but the Riverside County Sheriff's Department authorities believe she was dumped where she was found. Investigators determined that she had been dead for several weeks. This victim is later referred to as Claudia. Claudia was believed to be between 21 to 26 years old, a white female, 5'4", and weighed about 125 pounds. She had shoulder-length, wavy, blonde, light brown hair and very light-colored, thin eyebrows. She had 2 small dots tattooed on her right thumb between the knuckle and her nail. Her finger and toenails were painted with a gold glitter polish. Police couldn't obtain fingerprints from the victim, but they could get DNA. They also identified that she was missing some teeth and had amalgam fillings. California Jane Doe was wearing blue denim pants, waist 32 inches and an inseam of 30 inches, with pant legs rolled up, a gray or white t-shirt with a skeleton riding a Harley motorcycle on the front, and words under that said, "Ride me, ride free." 1 month later, in September of 1992, the body of Cynthia Lynn Rose, 32, was found. Her body was discovered behind the Blueberry Hill Cafe along U.S. Highway 99 near Turlock, California. She had been dead for some time, and her death was initially listed as a drug overdose. So up to this point, we have 3 women murdered and bodies found with striking similarities. Taunja Bennett was murdered on January 21st, 1990. And found 2 days later. California Jane Doe, in August of 92, was found dead several weeks after her murder. And now Cynthia, discovered in September of 92, again several weeks after her murder. 2 months later, in November of 1992, 26-year-old Lori Ann Pentland's body was found after being discarded in Salem, Oregon, behind the G.I. Joe store. Detectives determined that she had been strangled, but had no leads as to who her killer might be. They would eventually learn that the strangulation appeared to be the happy face killer's preferred method of murder. In June of 1993, the body of an unknown female was found by a truck driver who stopped along California Highway 152 in unincorporated Gilroy, about a half hour south of San Jose. Her death occurred in May of 1993. The woman was dressed in blue denim, and she was found by detectives from Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. The manner of death was ruled homicide by strangulation. Forensic scientists determined the woman to be white, possibly Hispanic, 5'3", and weighing 130 pounds. Her attire was that of a typical homeless, transient person. She had a 5-inch scar on her abdomen, likely due to a gallbladder surgical operation. She had dental work, but her teeth had deteriorated, probably due to a long period of neglect. Without any leads on her identity, authorities referred to her as Blue Pacheco due to the color she was wearing and the nickname of Highway 152, Pacheco Pass Highway. On April 29, 1994, someone began writing letters to the media, particularly to a columnist, Phil Stanford, for the Oregonian newspaper in Portland, Oregon, claiming responsibility for Taunja, Cynthia, and the other women's murders. Phil was handed a letter from his editor, John Killen. Killen told him, "It looks pretty crazy, but you might want to look at it." The letter had happy faces drawn all over it. I'll have a picture of the letter on the Instagram account for you guys to see. Now, I'm going to read the letter for you guys, but trigger warning because it does contain rape and gets kind of graphic. So at the top of the letter, there's a happy face that's drawn, and it says all 5 of 5. Now, this is a partial letter. They've only released this one page. We cannot get the other copies. It says, "I would like to tell my story. I am a good person at times. I always wanted to be liked. I have been married and divorced with children. I didn't really want to be married, but it happened. I have read your paper and enjoyed it a lot. I always have wanted to be noticed, like Paul Harvey, front page, etc. So I started something I don't know how to stop. On or around January 20th, 1990, I picked up Taunja Bennett and took her home. I raped her and beat her real bad. Her face was all broke up. Then I ended her life by pushing my fist into her throat. This turned me on. I got a high, then the panic set in. Where to put the body? I drove out to the Sandy River and threw her purse and Walkman away, and I drove the scenic road past the falls. I went back home and dragged her out to the car. I want to know that it was my crime, so I tied a 1/2-inch soft white rope, cut at one end, and burned on the other." Now, in this letter, he is referring to Taunja as Sonia, but there are so many other details that match. In one letter, he claimed that Cynthia was a prostitute he had picked up and murdered. He signed his letters with a smiling, happy face, and Phil dubbed him, for lack of any other name, the Happy Face Killer. Although the letters were turned over to the police, there was little for investigators to go on with identifying the letter writer, and this mysterious writer would maintain his anonymity until 1995. The remains of another Jane Doe were found more than a year later, on September 14, 1994, west of Crestview, Florida, along Interstate 10, by a road crew working in the Florida Panhandle. This Jane Doe is believed to have been between 36 to 45 years old, 5'6", and 110 pounds. She had brown hair that appeared to be bleached. She was found wearing a floral jacket with sequins on the upper shoulder, cuffs, and collar, and a floral Brandywine Creek dress with buttons up the front. Her jewelry included an inexpensive silver ring, a heart-shaped silver ring, a black cord bracelet with multicolored beads, a silver band, a charm bracelet without charms, and a cord necklace with a triangle, square, and 2 circle pendants. Although homicide detectives have made several attempts at identifying the woman through facial reconstructions, investigators had little to work with besides the bones. The Happy Face Killer, however, would eventually claim that this victim's name was Suzanne. Although her corpse would not be found until September of 1995, 21-year-old Angela Sobrise of Oklahoma City would become the Happy Face Killer's 7th victim. Until then, few people would realize that Angela was even missing, much less dead, due to her transient lifestyle. It wasn't until victim number 8 that the Happy Face Killer became careless by murdering someone he knew instead of a complete stranger. Julie Ann Winningham, 41, of Camas, Washington, was believed to have been murdered on March 10, 1995, in Washagool, Washington, just a few miles east of Vancouver, Washington. Like the others, she was strangled, and her nude body had been dumped over an embankment alongside State Highway 14, just east of the Clark and Skamania County line. Unlike the others, Julie's friends and relatives knew she had been seeing a man named Keith Hunter Jesperson. They provided the first valuable link, his name, that would aid investigators in apprehending one of the most notorious serial killers of the past decade. Seasoned Clark County, Washington Sheriff's Department detective Rick Buckner, well known for his role in the Wesley Allen Dodd child murders investigation a few years earlier, don't worry, we'll be covering that in a later episode, caught the Julie Ann Winningham case assignment. Buckner initially learned that Julie was a Camas resident who had relocated to Utah for a while after breaking up with her truck driver husband. According to those he interviewed, she returned to Camas in February of 1995 with a man named Keith Jesperson, who she referred to as her fiancé. According to Buckner's information, Julie met Jesperson at a truck stop in Utah and hitched a ride back to Washington. Some of her acquaintances told Buckner that Jesperson was a big guy. Some described him as a giant and a Baby Huey type person. For those of you who don't know who Baby Huey is, Baby Huey was a giant and naive cartoon duckling from the 1950s. Buckner also learned that Jesperson had no criminal record in the state of Washington. He knew that Jesperson had been married to a woman named Rose in 1986, and they had 3 children. The only records that turned up in his search for information about Jesperson were the court records from Yakima County that showed that he and Rose had divorced in 1990. Buckner quickly learned of the Cheney trucking company that Jesperson worked for. Company officials told Buckner that he traveled all over the country, and the days immediately following Julie's death, he was on the road to Pennsylvania. The company officials provided Buckner with Jesperson's travel itinerary back toward the West Coast, which would take him through Texas, New Mexico, and eventually to Arizona. By Wednesday, March 22, 1995, Buckner had traced Jesperson to Las Cruces, New Mexico, a city in the southern part of the state near the Mexican border. With the help of sheriff's deputies in Las Cruces, Buckner and another detective detained Jesperson for more than 6 hours and questioned him about the murder of Julie Winningham. By Jesperson's account, Buckner and the other detective tried to get Jesperson to confess to Julie's murder, but he wouldn't talk. Jesperson would later say that they kept asking him if he wanted to talk about it or if he desired an attorney present during the questioning. And when he said that he did, in fact, want an attorney, they asked him why he needed one, whether he had done something that required a lawyer's assistance. Since he wouldn't talk, and they lacked concrete evidence to arrest him, the detectives had no choice but to release him. Afterward, Jesperson immediately headed for Arizona, and Buckner returned to Washington. While in southern Arizona, Jesperson attempted to give some reason for the murders of the women he had killed, or so he claimed. Unable to do so, he claims that he made 2 attempts at suicide. The first on the evening of March 22nd, and the second the following evening, each time overdosing on over-the-counter sleeping pills. Each time, he said, his body had rejected the sleeping aids. On March 24th, after apparently deciding that the cops would nail him for Julie's murder and that he might fare considerably better with the judicial system if he turned himself in, Jesperson wrote 2 letters, one to his children and one to his brother. In part, the letter to his brother read, "Seems like my luck has run out. I will never be able to enjoy life on the outside again. I got into a bad situation and got caught up with emotion. I killed a woman in my truck during an argument. With all the evidence against me, it looks like I truly am the black sheep. The court will appoint me a lawyer, and there will be a trial. I am sure they will kill me for this. I am sorry that I turned out this way. I have been a killer for 5 years and have killed 8 people and assaulted more. I guess I haven't learned anything. Dad always has worried about me because of what I have gone through in the divorce and finances, etc. I have been taking it out on different people. As I saw it, I was hoping they would catch me. I took 48 sleeping pills last night, and I woke up well rested. The night before, I took 2 bottles of pills to no avail. They will arrest me today. Later that same night, after dropping the letters he had written into the mail, Jesperson called Detective Buckner from Cochise County, Arizona, and confessed to the murder of Julie Ann Winningham. According to Jesperson, he admitted to Julie's murder because he knew he would be sentenced to life in prison or executed. In either case, he would no longer be in a position where he could kill another woman. 6 days later, Rick Buckner flew to Arizona to take Jesperson into his custody and return him to Washington State, where he would be formally charged with Julie's murder. According to what Jesperson would later write, Buckner allegedly told him, Wesley Allen Dodd once wore those same handcuffs. Jesperson said in his writings that he thought to himself after Buckner's purported remarks, if he only knew what was in them now, he would faint. When he arrived in Washington, Jesperson called his brother and instructed him to destroy the letter he had sent him. However, on the advice of a lawyer and Jesperson's father, his brother turned the letter over to the police because they felt it was unlawful to hold on to or destroy evidence. Shortly after the letter was given to the police, it was published by several newspapers. Meanwhile, Buckner began transmitting information about Jesperson to law enforcement agencies nationwide. He provided information about Jesperson's confession and the letter he had written to his brother. He inquired whether any jurisdictions had unsolved homicides that might fit into Jesperson's travel itineraries. Within days, Buckner's office received 16 responses from law enforcement agencies as far away as New York and Florida, and the process of examining unsolved homicides in many states had begun. In addition to Jesperson's travel routes, investigators took another look at the physical evidence collected from several crime scenes involving murdered women, including bodily fluids for DNA analysis for the possible match to Jesperson. Focusing on female homicide victims found along major roadways and near truck stops, Oregon, Nevada, and Utah authorities were among the first to begin re-examining their open cases. Of particular interest to investigators in Oregon was an unsolved case of a woman who had disappeared from the vicinity of a truck stop in Wilsonville area in the northern part of the state in August of 1994, and whose body was eventually found along a highway near Medford in southern Oregon in March of 1995, shortly after Jesperson's arrest. Authorities in Utah and the Great Basin area of northeastern Nevada also re-examined several unsolved homicides involving women to see if Jesperson somehow fit into the scheme of things. Although their gut instinct told them that Jesperson was probably their killer in a number of the cases they re-examined, they lacked sufficient evidence to bring any charges against him. Before we go on, I want to give you all a trigger warning. We're about to cover the area of animal cruelty, especially that of household pets. Uncover the secrets of your dog's DNA with Wisdom Panel, the world's leading canine genetics test. With a simple cheek swab, Wisdom Panel can reveal your dog's breed, ancestry, health traits, and so much more. Understanding your dog's genetic background can help you provide the best care possible. Whether it's identifying potential health risks, understanding their behavior, or simply satisfying your curiosity about your dog's unique heritage, Wisdom Panel delivers the insights you need. Their state-of-the-art technology analyzes over 350 breeds, types, and varieties, and screens for over 200 genetic health conditions. Plus, their easy-to-understand reports make it simple to learn about your dog's genetics. Join the millions of pet parents discovering their dog's story with Wisdom Panel. Order your kit today and start exploring your dog's DNA. Because every dog has a tale, and Wisdom Panel helps you tell it. Go to wisdompanel.pxf.io/ccpod to learn more about your four-legged friend. That's wisdompanel.pxf.io/ccpod. Buckner learned that by the time Keith Jesperson was 6, he had gotten his first taste of killing living things by bashing in the heads of gophers while still in British Columbia. By the time he was 20, while living with his parents in Washington State Trailer Park, Keith got his first taste of killing larger animals when he began dragging stray dogs and cats into a field near the park where he would beat them to death with a shovel, strangle them with his bare hands, or shoot them with his BB gun. He discovered that he enjoyed it. Jesperson bragged to a reporter, "I was Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was like I was playing war. When I looked at those dogs, they would squat and pee. They would be so scared that they'd tremble." By his own admission, Jesperson enjoyed the fear he instilled in these animals and took great pleasure in watching and feeling their life drain out until they succumbed to death. Jesperson said, "You come to the point where killing something is nothing. It's the same feeling whether strangling a human being or an animal. You've already felt the pressure on the throat of them trying to grab air. You're actually squeezing the life out of these animals, and there isn't much difference. They're going to fight for their lives just as much as a human being will." Nowadays, it's no secret that those with propensity toward animal violence and abuse during their younger years sometimes move on to more violent crimes directed at human beings later in life. Abusive behavior towards animals is one of the symptoms on the road to being a murderer. Jesperson wrote that it was in his early childhood that the aggression towards animals began, and explained that his father once witnessed him throw a cat against the pavement and finish it off by strangling it to death. Jesperson wrote his father had appeared proud of how he had dealt with the cat and bragged to others about how Keith had gotten rid of the stray cats and dogs in the mobile home park where they lived. Jesperson said, "All this did was spawn in me the urge to kill again. I began to think of what it would be like to kill a human being. The thought stayed with me for years until one night it happened. I killed a woman by beating her almost to death and finished her off by strangulation." He said, explaining how he killed Taunja Bennett. "No longer did I search for animals to mistreat. I now looked for people to kill, and I did. I killed over and over until I was caught. Now I'm paying for it with the rest of my life behind bars. We should stop the cruelty to anything before it develops into a bigger problem like me." Jesperson was attempting to convince the public to buy into the idea that a compassionate side to him existed where none did. During his many letter-writing campaigns to reporters and writers with websites, Jesperson tried to present a different side of his personality. In one letter, he might write about his compassionate side. In another, he would refer to the roadside victims as piles of garbage and attempt to place doubt in the public and law enforcement's eyes that he was the killer, but had instead merely only stumbled onto someone else's garbage, only to have a murder unfairly pinned on him after reporting finding the roadside bodies. In yet other letters, he would write about offering a self-start serial killer kit, such as the following, and a blatant attempt at a sick humor and sarcasm. "This is the offer you have all been dying for, the self-start serial killer kit. Now you can be the only serial killer on your block. Learn from a professional serial killer. Get rid of that unwanted family member. Get that job you always wanted by opening up the slot. Everyone will be dying to meet you. Get a full-life Julie Winningham look-alike doll with an extra tough spring-back neck so you will soon have the strength to squeeze the shit out of anyone." Jesperson once told a reporter that, "I enjoy screwing with the press and prosecutors through the press. I do what has to be done to get results. Often, as will be seen, the result that he often looked for was avoiding receiving the death sentence. While Jesperson sat in the Clark County Jail for the murder of Julie Winningham, he began talking to his attorney, Thomas Phelan, about other crimes he had committed. The conversation started when Phelan asked Jesperson about the letter he had sent to his brother, which was turned over to the police. Jesperson began telling the attorney his innermost secrets in an adrenaline-scared rush when he realized he would be labeled a serial killer after the police linked him to additional killings. One of those cases involved the murder of 21-year-old Angela Sobrise. Against legal advice to keep his mouth shut, Jesperson told his account of Angela's murder to other inmates, who in turn reported what he had said to authorities. Clark County investigators relayed the information to their counterparts in Wyoming and Nebraska. Later, Jesperson would talk to investigators about Angela's killings and others and would detail his accounts in his letter-writing campaign and internet postings made possible through the help of people willing to post his writings on their websites. According to Jesperson's account, he picked up Angela near Spokane, Washington in January of 1995 and had agreed to give her a ride to Fort Collins, Colorado to see her father. At one point along the way, they stopped so that she could call her dad, who Jesperson would later claim told her that he didn't want to see her and to stay away. Afterward, Angela changed her mind about going to Fort Collins and asked Jesperson to take her to Indiana instead to visit a friend. Jesperson explained that he became enraged when Angela would not let him sleep when they had stopped at a truck stop just east of Cheyenne, Wyoming. She kept complaining at him to keep driving in bad weather, and he ended up strangling her by placing his fist tightly against her throat. Trigger warning. Afterward, he went back to sleep. When he awoke about 3 hours later, he drove to Nebraska and pulled off into the rest area where he bound her body with black nylon rope and secured it face down beneath his rig. He dragged her body along the pavement for about 10 to 12 miles until it became loose. He then untied her body and threw it in a ditch about 75 feet off of Interstate 80, some 250 miles east of the truck stop where he had killed her. The nylon rope was still attached to her ankles. Sergeant Terry Bolig of the Laramie County, Wyoming Sheriff's Department caught the assignment in that jurisdiction since Angela was believed to have been killed in Wyoming. Bolig learned that Angela had led a transient lifestyle and had not been reported missing by family members. Bolig, however, eventually located her father by examining phone calls charged to a credit card believed to have belonged to Jesperson's brother. As spring slowly turned into summer, and summer just as slowly made its way into autumn, Keith Jesperson sat in jail in Washington with little else to do except to think about his crimes and make plans on how he might manipulate the system to his benefit as prosecutors built their case against him for the murder of Julie Ann Winningham. Similarly, authorities for Wyoming confronted him with what little evidence and information they had regarding Angela. At one point, they showed him a photo of her in which he identified Angela as the person he had picked up and killed. He also told the investigators about an important detail that would leave little doubt in their minds that he was truthful regarding Angela for reasons known only to him. He said that she had a tattoo of Tweety Bird on one of her ankles in which Tweety was making an obscene gesture with one of its hands. In September of 1995, based on specific and accurate information from Jesperson relayed by Clark County, Washington, investigators to their counterparts in Nebraska, a Nebraska highway patrolman found Angela's remains lying near the shoulder of Interstate 80 near Gothenburg, a small town of 3,200 residents located near the South Platte River, where it had been lying in tall grass for several months, probably since early January. Badly decomposed, most of her skin had decayed, and investigators were able to identify her only after examining pelvic x-rays and finding the tattoo of Tweety Bird that was still visible on one of her ankles, one of the only few identifying marks that remained on her body. As the Wyoming investigators continued to systematically build their case against Jesperson, one in which they hoped would eventually bring him to the death penalty, Jesperson continued making plans of his own on how to manipulate the system to his benefit. Nonetheless, Jesperson was soon charged with Angela's murder, and Wyoming prosecutors promptly rejected an offer by his attorney for him to provide information in exchange for an agreement from Wyoming not to seek the death penalty. Meanwhile, investigators in Washington, California, and Oregon examined Jesperson's handwriting. Because of the comments that he had been making to other inmates and due to the letter that he had written to his brother, the investigators wanted to determine if Jesperson was the same person who had written the letters to Phil Stanford of the Oregonian, claiming to have killed 3 women in California and 2 in Oregon. Using the letter he wrote to his brother, claiming to have killed 8 women over 5 years, the investigators saw similarities in the handwriting and the crimes themselves.
Does your furry friend deserve the best? Of course they do. That's why there's BoxDog, a seasonal box of premium products designed just for your pooch. With BoxDog, you can spoil your pet with a fun and exciting selection of high-quality items. From gourmet treats and chew toys to comfy apparel and unique accessories, BoxDog has it all. Each box is packed with hand-selected products guaranteed to wag tails and bring joy. But BoxDog isn't just about products. It's about providing a personalized experience for your pet. You can customize each box to suit your dog's specific needs and preferences, ensuring they get what they love every time. And the best part? BoxDog delivers straight to your door, making it a convenient and hassle-free way to keep your pet pampered. So why wait? Treat your dog to the luxury they deserve with BoxDog, because every dog deserves a box full of happiness. Order your BoxDog today. Go to boxdog.pxf.io/ccpod. That's boxdog.pxf.io/ccpod.
Regarding one of the California victims, the happy-faced killer wrote that he had used duct tape to bind her hands and feet, a fact that was never released to the public. Investigators also found duct tape near her body. Similarly, in statements made to the police, Jesperson claimed to have taped Julie Winningham's mouth shut with duct tape. But there were discrepancies in the letters as well. In one happy-faced killer letter, the writer claimed to have quit long-haul truck driving and was instead employed as a driver where I am the public eye and out of harm's way. I got away from what became easy. I do not want to kill again. Yet, another similarity in the letter writing between Jesperson and the happy-faced killer appeared when Jesperson wrote to the Columbian newspaper in Vancouver, Washington, and had it smuggled out of jail. In that letter, he again alluded to a desire to be caught so that he would not kill again, and stated, I know what I have done has been wrong, and I feel sorry for all the families of my victims. I am, in fact, the happy-faced killer. I created that man because I wanted to be stopped, but it is hard to just come out and say it. I have prayed many nights in this cold, dark prison cell for the answer, and God has told me to come clean with it all and tell the truth about everything. I will not be happy until I am replacing that man in the Oregon State Penitentiary for a crime I did and he goes free. Most people will say that I am a monster. I am not a monster. Just like the movie Jurassic Park, I was created by people. Jesperson's comments about John Sosnovske and their obvious relevance to the Taunja Bennett case shocked the investigators, especially Detectives Corson and Ingram and Prosecutor McIntyre, responsible for putting John and Laverne behind bars. His comments marked the first time that anyone had sown any seeds of doubt and the right suspects had been prosecuted. Naturally, all of those involved were inclined to believe that Jesperson was lying and that they had convicted the right people for Tanya's murder. As soon as I feel we have the wrong people in jail, you'll probably catch me going to Salem to get them out, Multnomah County District Attorney Michael Schrunk said of Jesperson's remarks. In the meantime, Jesperson's attorney went to work setting up a plea bargain agreement between the state of Oregon and Jesperson regarding Tanya's murder. In writing the letter to the Colombian, Jesperson realized that he would need the help of public opinion if he could convince authorities that he had killed Taunja Bennett. When one looks at Keith Jesperson's case as a whole, it becomes easier to see that his motivation for confessing to Tanya's murder was not so much out of a desire to come clean or that he was being sympathetic or empathetic, but was in all likelihood motivated more out of his desire for self-preservation. Jesperson knew that if extradited to Wyoming, he would potentially face the death penalty for the murder of Angela Sobrise. However, if he were able to confess to Taunja Bennett's murder and be sentenced to death in Oregon, a state where the death sentence hasn't been carried out since the early 1960s, he knew that he could at the very least postpone any actions that Wyoming might be able to carry out against him. It was even likely that Oregon would not sentence him to death, but would give him life in prison if his attorney successfully worked out a plea agreement. He later revealed that his reasonings had been that his confession and subsequent sentence in Oregon would make it ultimately more difficult for Wyoming to get its hands on him. The press appeared more than eager to help out as reporters from a number of newspapers contacted Jesperson about the claims he was making. He told them that Laverne Pavlinac and John Sosnovske were innocent and had been sent to prison for a crime that he committed. According to Jesperson, the police initially did not believe him and insisted they had the right people in jail for Tanya's murder. It wasn't until he insisted that he could lead them to the location of Tanya's purse and Oregon identification card, something that Laverne Pavlinac had been unable to do, that they began to show interest. It wasn't until after Jesperson had led the detectives to those critical pieces of evidence lying behind a bush near the Sandy River that they began to believe him. When taken to where Tanya's body was found, he provided them with information about the body and its position, details that no one other than the killer and the cops could know. Adding credence to what Jesperson had provided them, Jesperson told the investigators to review his lawyer's notes that were compiled in May of 1995 before the press or anyone else had any idea that Jesperson might be the Happy Face killer, who had written intimate details about the case to the Oregonian. Through his attorney, Jesperson indicated that he was willing to plead no contest to the murder of Taunja Bennett. In the meantime, it was agreed that Laverne Pavlinac and Keith Jesperson would undergo polygraph examinations, which the FBI would administer. The results of the polygraph test indicated that Laverne was being truthful in her denials that she had killed Taunja, and that Jesperson was being truthful in his claims of being the killer. The results of the test also showed that Jesperson and Laverne did not know each other. Based on the new information, Multnomah County District Attorney Michael Schrunk filed a motion in Marion County, where the Oregon State Penitentiary is located, asking for the immediate release of Laverne and John. Schrunk told the presiding Marion County Circuit Judge, Paul Lipscomb, that Laverne and John had served more than 4 years in prison for a crime they didn't commit. He also outlined the evidence that Jesperson had provided. However, Lipscomb refused to release the couple immediately. Instead, the judge said that he would consider an evidentiary hearing after Jesperson had entered his plea in which Jesperson could testify on behalf of Laverne and John. It's extraordinary. You don't see prosecutors doing this all the time. It's the appropriate thing to do under the appropriate circumstances, Schrunk said afterward. He emphasized that there were no more improprieties on the part of the judge, jury, or lawyers when Laverne and John were convicted. The evidence they had at the time was ample evidence to convict. Deputy District Attorney James McIntyre said, "There are a lot of dynamics to this case, and you would have had to have been there to understand." McIntyre, who prosecuted the case, said he did not owe anyone an apology for having prosecuted a case that sent 2 innocent people to prison. He said, "What I will say is that based upon the evidence we discovered in interviewing Jesperson, we couldn't have obtained these convictions." Laverne's family, meanwhile, remained hopeful that the judge would do the right thing and release Laverne and John from prison. "We're happy, but not happy enough," one of Laverne's relatives said after Lipscomb's decision. "We need the release order signed before we get real happy. The case should have never gone to trial. If the jury had heard the whole truth, they would have never been able to convict. She was always reading mystery books and murder books. She read in the paper that this girl had been murdered and that the police didn't have a suspect, so she gave them a suspect." In the meantime, while Jesperson waited to enter his plea for murdering Taunja Bennett, and as the state of Wyoming continued building its case against him for the murder of Angela Soubise, Jesperson continued his many contacts with the news media, claiming responsibility for the murders of several other women. After Taunja, Jesperson said, "There was Claudia, a girl wanting a ride to Phoenix, Arizona with me. She tried to extort my wallet from me and died trying. Then there was Cynthia Lynn Rose, a prostitute working the southbound rest area on Highway 99 near Turlock, California. Then Lori Ann Pentland, a prostitute working the Burns Brothers truck stop in Wilsonville, Oregon. Then a Jane Doe prostitute working the Petro truck stop in Corning, California. Then a woman I gave a ride to in Florida going to Lake Tahoe, Nevada. She called herself Suzanne." Jesperson also claimed that he was responsible for the murders of the following women: Bobby in Oregon, October 27, 1992. Lynn in Nevada, January 1993. Susan in Oklahoma, January 1993. Linda in Washington, March 1993. Sunny in Arizona, April 1993. Jane Doe in Idaho, April 1993. Jane Doe in California, May 1993. Jane Doe in California, July 1993. Jane Doe in Arizona, September 1993. Carrie in Idaho, November 1993. Karen in Georgia, February 1994. Carol in Nevada, February 1994. Jane Doe in Nebraska, October 1994. Jane Doe in Iowa, February 1995. And Jane Doe in Indiana, February 1995.
Hey, crime connoisseurs. If you're like me, you love diving into a good book. I especially love finding a book about cases we cover. But sometimes it's hard to find the time to sit and read. We live in an on-the-go society. Thankfully, Audible makes it easy to instantly access the books we love without sacrificing our time. With over 180,000 audiobooks and more, you will undoubtedly find one that will grip you and leave you not wanting to pull away while still being able to do other things. You can get a free 30-day trial membership by going to audibletrial.com/ccpod to start listening to your favorite books. That's audibletrial.com/ccpod for your free 30-day trial membership.
There were others that he could not name or provide a location for. All in all, he said he was responsible for at least 160 slayings across the United States. Jesperson told the media that he admitted to all of these murders because he was bothered by his guilty conscience. However, Jesperson would later recant most of the confessions, like Henry Lee Lucas before him. At one point, according to an account by the Happy Face Killer himself, Jesperson was visited by investigators from what was then left of the Green River Killer Task Force, wanting to know if he was responsible for any of the still unsolved killings in their jurisdictions. Since many of Jesperson's victims were known prostitutes and strangulation was his preferred method of murder, Jesperson naturally looked like a feasible candidate in at least some of the Green River killings. The fact that he was trucking in and out of Seattle and the surrounding areas almost daily in the early to mid-1980s, hauling flatbeds of scrap steel into the steel mills of Seattle and Tacoma, made him look even more viable as a suspect. Jesperson, in his own words, claimed that he told the following story to an unnamed investigator of the Green River Task Force. Quote, "One day, they had me in a room and told me to tell them about Seattle. They have reason to believe that I am one of the killers that is responsible for some of the Green River murders. They still believe this, but are waiting for more information to flow through my lips on the subject. Thinking for only 5 minutes, I thought of this story to tell them to throw them off, but it backfired instead. The story involved 2 sisters, and the police had never mentioned to the press that 2 sisters had become victims of the Green River killer. It was about 8 p.m. as I drove north up the Seattle-Tacoma Strip instead of taking Interstate 5. This roadway is full of hitchhikers and hookers at this time of night. I was eyeing 2 cute hookers as they talked at the bus stop. Both were good lookers, but I wanted one by herself. About a quarter of a mile up the road, I spotted a bitch walking fast up the sidewalk. Her hips were swinging from side to side, and she had nice long legs that climbed up to her butt. Her body was slender and firm. She seemed to be in a hurry. As I was approaching her at 35 miles per hour, I thought for just a moment about her, but knew first I had to get the rest of my steel on. The fun will come later. She reached the bus stop before I got there, and without looking out for traffic, she stepped right out in front of me. With a car passing me on my left, I could only brake to hope from hitting her. I heard the impact as her body struck my bumper and felt her tumble under my tires. I had managed to stop the truck quickly, and with the emergency flashers going, I stepped out of the truck a little shaken. I had stopped the truck, and her body was still under my trailer. She was dead, and I looked around for witnesses, but there were none, and the traffic was little to none. No one had witnessed the accident. I felt I could get away with it if only I could get her body away from there. So I dragged her body out from under the trailer, and I placed her in the cab of the 1964 Kenworth, and I got in and drove up north the strip for a half mile. On the right was an open field with tall trees and enough brush to hide behind to dig her shallow grave. As he continued his tale, Jesperson told of how he had grabbed his shovel after throwing the dead woman over his shoulder. He carried her back into the field, tossed her body on the ground, and removed all of her jewelry, placing it inside his pocket. As he dug her grave, he explained that he had heard something or someone approaching him. Not wishing to be seen, he knelt down and watched. The man, like Jesperson, was carrying a body, but his was inside a black plastic bag. He placed it on the ground and dug a grave nearby as Jesperson watched. Jesperson said he decided to approach the man and startled him as he did so. "I was about done when I saw you walking towards me," Jesperson said he told the man. "I couldn't help but be amazed that 2 of us had to get rid of 2 bodies at the same time. Now that I know what you came out here for, I will get back to what I was doing." After they had both buried the bodies in the field, Jesperson said the 2 of them decided to stop at a restaurant and have coffee together. "I couldn't help but notice that yours and mine looked a lot alike," Jesperson said he told the man. "They had the same features. The only difference was the necklace. I took off mine. I pulled the jewelry from my pocket and placed it on the table." He picked up the jewelry and studied it, and a tear came to his eyes. Jesperson said he asked the man what was wrong. "It seems we have a lot more in common than just burying 2 girls at the same time," Jesperson said the man told him. "We both have killed identical twins. Yours is the sister to mine." The story was evidently a fabrication designed by Jesperson's imagination. It's an excellent example of his ability to lie easily and quickly without giving much advanced thought to the process. According to profiler and serial killer expert Dr. Maurice Godwin, who often works closely with law enforcement investigations to assist the police with his expertise, there were no sisters as victims in the Green River case. Jesperson later proudly proclaimed that he had made it all up. Interestingly, in his "I Am a Liar" essay published widely on the internet, he also denied most, if not all, of his prior admissions of guilt. The Green River Task Force seemed to quickly lose interest in him after seeing his telling of the tale of 2 sisters. Still, it remains interesting that he would choose to identify so closely with a case involving so many victims whose deaths, at least in some cases, closely parallel those of his own known victims. When taking into consideration the outdoor locations of the Green River crime scenes, the nude bodies, strangulations as cause of death, prostitutes and transient-type victims, and so forth, and when making a comparison to Jesperson's victims and crime scenes, one can only wonder if Jesperson had, in reality, committed any of the murders attributed to the Green River Killer. So far, however, he has not been charged or listed as an official suspect in connection with any of those murders. In October of 1995, just before the trial began, Keith Jesperson pled guilty to the murder of Julie Ann Winningham before Clark County, Washington Superior Court Judge Robert L. Harris. Harris, the same judge who presided over the Wesley Allen Dodd case, sentenced Jesperson to life in prison in December following proceedings in Oregon. Meanwhile, Jesperson waived extradition from Clark County and was transferred to Oregon. On Thursday, November 2, 1995, after waiving all his rights, he entered a no-contest plea before Multnomah County presiding judge Donald H. Launder for the murder of Taunja Bennett. Launder immediately sentenced Jesperson to life in prison, setting a minimum 30-year prison term before being eligible for parole. Launder's sentence in effect gave Jesperson what he wanted, namely prison time in Oregon. Proceedings elsewhere would require extradition, meaning considerable expense and a lot of red tape. The Oregon sentence made potential death penalties in other states less likely, and Jesperson knew it. The no-contest plea and subsequent sentence also set the final wheels for Laverne and John's release from prison in motion. However, another Oregon case involving Jesperson had to be dealt with in the meantime: the murder of 23-year-old Lori Ann Pentland. According to the Marion County District Attorney's Office, investigators linked Jesperson to Lori's murder through DNA and other forensic evidence after learning that Jesperson was the Happy Face Killer. Jesperson had written letters as the Happy Face Killer after Lori's murder, claiming responsibility for her death. He had said that she was an acquaintance he had contacted via Citizens Band radio while in Salem. In one letter, he said he'd had sex with her several times. I felt so much power, he had written as the Happy Face Killer. I then told her she was going to die and slowly strangled her. Jesperson was again sentenced to life in prison in Oregon with a 30-year minimum term before parole eligibility. Following his sentence in Washington, he was transferred to Oregon State Penitentiary to begin serving consecutive sentences. If he remains alive to complete his sentences in Oregon, he will be transferred to the Washington State Penitentiary to begin serving his life sentence there. On November 27, 1995, after serving more than 4 years in prison for a crime they did not commit, Laverne Pavlinac and John Sosnovske were released from prison. Jesperson purportedly cried when he learned of their release. It wasn't known, however, whether his tears were tears of happiness for the couple or tears of regret for having confessed to the murder that he knew he could have gotten away with. More than 2 years later, after considerable legal wrangling, the state of Wyoming finally succeeded in extraditing Jesperson for a trial for the murder of Angela Surprise. For the next few months, as prosecutors prepared to go to trial, Jesperson taunted the authorities and threatened to force a costly trial by changing his story regarding the jurisdiction in which he had killed Angela. At one point, he said that he had killed her in Wyoming, and at another point, he claimed that he had killed her in Nebraska. After going back and forth for some time surrounding Jesperson's deliberate misleading statements in his attempt to confuse authorities on who had jurisdiction to prosecute him, a deal was worked out. Jesperson agreed to plead guilty to murdering Angela Surprise in Wyoming if Laramie County prosecutors agreed to not seek the death penalty against him. As a result, on June 3, 1998, District Judge Nicholas Kalokathis sentenced Jesperson to life in prison. He ordered that the sentence run consecutive to the 2 life sentences in Oregon and the life sentence in Washington, leaving little doubt that he would die in prison. Afterwards, he was promptly returned to the Oregon State Penitentiary. It remains to be seen whether any other jurisdictions, such as the states of Florida or California, will prosecute Jesperson for the murders that he confessed to in those states. In 2006, after already serving years of his consecutive life sentence in the Oregon State Penitentiary, Jesperson submitted a letter to the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office admitting to the sexual assault and killing of an unknown female who we now know as Blue Pacheco along Highway 152. A year later, he was convicted for this murder. During a routine follow-up in 2019, cold case detectives at the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department partnered with the DNA Doe Project, hoping investigative genetic genealogy could be used to identify victim number 5, Blue Pacheco. DNA Doe Project started researching genetic matches immediately, finally arriving at a likely candidate in 2021. According to DNA Doe Project, Sergeant Sharon Catalano made the most of the information they discovered through genealogy, contacting potential family members and encouraging them to upload their DNA profiles to GED Match voluntarily. After pursuing multiple leads, on April 13, 2022, the cold case detectives finally identified Blue Pacheco as Patricia Patsy Skypel, confirming the identification through DNA testing. Every DNA match made a difference in this difficult case, said DDP team leader Harmony Bronson. Patsy was a mother from Colton, Oregon, a rural community southeast of Portland, the sheriff's office said. DNA Doe Project team leader Karen Binder said, "This case was exceptionally challenging due to the recent Norwegian ancestry, which resulted in very distant DNA matches on GED Match and Family Tree DNA. It would not have been possible to solve this case without the dedication of our fellow law enforcement partners in Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office, especially Sergeant Sharon Catalano, whose tenacious efforts to solve this case made our job as genealogists as effective as possible." Between Taunja and Jane Doe Claudia's murders, there was another victim of Jesperson's that little is covered about. In April of 1990, Dawn Slagle and her then husband had gotten into an argument, and she fled their house with their infant son. The two ended up at a shopping center where Dawn sat in a parking lot to cool off. Soon she felt eyes on her and noticed a man. He approached her, and the two chatted briefly before taking them for a drive. As they drove to a remote and secluded destination, Dawn began to panic. Dawn did an interview with Oprah on the Oprah Winfrey Show in 2009. Dawn said, "I didn't really know what his intentions were, but I knew they weren't good." For the next few hours, Dawn struggled to protect her and her son from harm done by Jesperson. Dawn spoke with Jesperson's daughter, Melissa Moore, for True Crime Daily and said Jesperson attempted to break her neck several times. At one point, Dawn's son rolled onto the brake pedal and Jesperson tried to crush his skull. Eventually, Jesperson just stopped. He started the car and began driving back in silence. As they got closer to town, Jesperson turned to Dawn and told her, "Never get in the car with a stranger because you never know if it's the last thing you'll ever do." Jesperson let Dawn go, and she immediately ran to the police station. Officers put out a bolo right away and agreed to take Dawn home. Jesperson was quickly apprehended and held at gunpoint. When brought in for questioning, Jesperson admitted to everything. Dawn was ready to press charges, but her husband convinced her not to. The police offered to give Dawn time to consider everything, but said to call them back soon. Dawn did call back and said she wanted to press charges, but unfortunately, the police informed her it was too late and that they had already let Jesperson go. As for why she survived, Dawn told Oprah, "I don't know if it was the baby screaming or whether it had to do with God, but I could not believe it." Dawn's survival is covered in a Lifetime movie, The Happy Face Killer. She is currently in a lawsuit with them for defamation of character. In the movie, Dawn is portrayed as a prostitute who performs oral sex on Jesperson in front of her son. Even though the character's name in the movie is Candy, the connection between the character and Dawn is easily made since Dawn is the sole survivor of Jesperson. Two of Jesperson's victims are still unidentified. California Jane Doe Claudia was found on August 30th, 1992. and would have been between the ages of 21 to 26 years old. She had a tattoo of 2 dots on her right thumb between the knuckle and fingernail. She was approximately 5'4" and 125 pounds. Her remains were found in Riverside County, California. Anyone with information about the possible identity of this woman, please contact the Riverside County Sheriff's Office at 951-955-2400. That's 951-955-2400. Case number 1992-75783. Florida Jane Doe Suzanne was found on September 15, 1994, and would have been between 36 and 45 years of age. She was between 5'3" and 5'6" and weighed 110 to 116 pounds. She is currently undergoing testing with the DNA Doe Project. Please contact the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office at 1-800-226-8574. Again, that's 1-800-226-8574 with any information that may help identify these women. And that's the case of the Happy Face Killer. So, like I said at the end of the episode, there are still 2 women who remain unidentified. If you or someone you know has a loved one that has gone missing around that time frame within those areas that possibly match the description, please consider submitting your DNA for genealogical testing. I'll have links for the DNA Doe projects posted so that this way here you guys can go right to those source filings and see the information firsthand for yourself. Let's help make a difference and try and give names to the nameless and give these women their identities back, identities that Keith Jesperson stole from them, because they deserve it. So be sure to follow on Instagram at Crime Connoisseurs and leave a comment on this case episode and let me know what you think. I would love to hear your guys' feedback on everything. You can listen to Crime Connoisseurs wherever you listen to your podcasts. In the meantime, keep it classy, connoisseurs, and I'll catch you on the next case.
Are you tired of settling for subpar cat food? It's time to upgrade your cat's dining experience with Smalls, the ultimate gourmet meal for your feline companion. Say goodbye to generic one-size-fits-all cat food. With Smalls, you can rest assured that your furry friend is getting the nutrition they deserve. Join the thousands of cat owners who have made the switch to Smalls and see the difference it can make in your cat's health and happiness. Treat your cat to the finest dining experience with Smalls. Visit smalls.sjv.io/ccpod now to order your first box. That's smalls.sjv.io/ccpod. Choose Smalls because your cat deserves the best.